I just want to stop the transcription. There we go. Welcome, everybody. We're 17. I see that there are still people joining, but I would like to introduce our workshop presenter today. Prof. Rudy de Lange served as the TUT's Faculty of Art and Design Research Ethics Chair and also the Deputy Chair of the TUT Research Ethics Committee. He chairs the TUT Art and Design Committee that screens research output for subsidy purposes and is on the TUT Internal Review Committee that screens and approves research output before submission to DHET for subsidy purposes. Rudy is a TUT Emeritus Professor and he is an NRF C3 rated researcher. And guys, I must tell you, there are very few design academics who actually managed to become NRF rated researchers. Rudy was also instrumental in getting DEFSA off the ground, and he also hosted, I don't know, 2-3 conferences many years ago. So he's he's very much part of our community, even though he said he's retired, but I still need to see him stopping work. So welcome, Rudy, and we look forward to your presentation.
Ria, thank you so much for that introduction. Yes, I've retired in East London, and it's wonderful not having to go to work and not having to attend any meetings. You know, this is really great. I must now just make sure I get my bearings together over here. Ria, can I ask you that if there's any questions or any comments that come up, if you can just interject and let me know. And colleagues, if we can keep to a first name basis, it's much easier, much quicker. And I would like this workshop presentation to be interactive as possible. So when I start my presentation, I may not see your hand, so put your hand up or make a comment and Ria will get that to me and we can stop and you can ask your question. And then I hope I'll have an answer for you. And then I'm also so pleased to see some of my colleagues, Inga and Yolandi, here. And I know that you've got experience in this field as well. And then if you can make a comment and reply to some of the questions as well, that we can really make it a team effort. And Willie, your question, you want to see what's the difference between design, ethics, and our field. And like Ria said, there's not much of a difference. Maybe just in one small aspect, and I will highlight that, but the norms and standards that it would apply to research ethics is universal, and they would apply to us as well. And I think the issue of design is, luckily, and maybe it's not a good one, we don't often work with vulnerable people, and we don't do medical research which is invasive. So it's maybe a little bit easier for us, but the norms and standards would apply to us as well. Can I just see a show of hands? How many of you are preparing to submit a paper for the conference proceedings and where you collected data or information from people or animals or the environment? Oh, Yolandi, one. Esther? Ria, I think you muted, eh?
Oh, yes, I am.
Okay.
We don't see your presentation anymore. We see your PowerPoint with the little things down the side.
Do you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. On my screen, I only see my presentation. I do not see the Teams interactive display. So Ria, if there's anything going on, if you can just let me know. our colleagues, when I saw the invite and I saw it was aimed at young academics, and I assume senior academics as well, preparing the papers for the DEFSA conference proceedings, I adjusted and focused this particular presentation in terms of research ethics reporting, those issues that we need to see in the full papers when submitted for peer review. Now, I hope that this will provide some guidance on research ethics reporting in papers for the DEFSA proceedings. And then this particular comment, the editors, I'm not an editor, or reviewers may or may not reject papers that do not provide required ethics information from animals or humans, or they did not receive ethical approval. And I hope that this workshop, the PowerPoint and the text supplement with hyperlink to source resources will assist you to prepare your full papers. Key issues or key aspects that I want to highlight, I will give in a light blue text box at the end of each session. This is the content that I will cover. I know we will not be able to remember this, but I'll go through each one as we proceed. And then a supplement to this PowerPoint, I've prepared a text document. It's in a PDF format that contain all the issues that I will discuss and all the issues highlighted in the PowerPoint. And I've also given hyperlinks in footnotes to all the issues. So everything in the PowerPoint would be expanded in this text document with hyperlinks. So the key would be to download this text document, and you can take that and then have a look at the resources which I cited and referred to. This will get to you, I assume, from RIA's side via email, and DEFSA mentioned that they will upload this to the DEFSA website. Right, the first thing that I want to mention is that research ethics is not a choice, it's not an option, it is a must. The National Health Act 61 of 2003 established the National Health Research Ethics Council. It's a statutory organization, and they determine the norms and standards for ethics in research. So although it is aimed at health research, it is also encompasses the type of work that we do when we work, for example, with people or with animals. And they determine guidelines, how Health Research Ethics Committee function, how they must register. They audit the Health Research Ethics Committee, so they set the norms and standards for conducting research on humans and animals. So universities are obliged to have research ethics committees, and institutions as well, like the CSIR, the Human Sciences Research Council, and so on. And that would include private institutions as well. Now, the norms and standards are influenced by international reports, declarations, national institutional requirements. And research ethics committees must register with the National Health Research Ethics Council. So even if an ethics committee operates, they need to be registered. Now, the Department of Health published in 2015 a book or a booklet, Ethics and Health Research Guidelines. And this is what the booklet looks like. It's available from download from most universities' websites and also from the Department of Health, and also from the NHREC website. And they provide the minimum research ethics norms and standards, the requirement for research ethics committees at universities, and also the requirements for animal research ethics committees. So this is, so to speak, the Bible that we can use to give us guidance in forming research ethics committees, what we've got to look at, and what is required. Now, for example, if I can highlight 3 issues that is core to this particular document. They require that research should reflect core values, and the key there is respect, scientific merit, integrity, justice, and benefit. It's got to protect the rights and safety of people that participate in research, and it's also to protect the safety and the interests of researchers. If I can maybe demonstrate with an example, if we would get a young researcher, young in age and inexperienced, that want to conduct research in a prison environment, a research ethics committee should not approve such a project and should not allow such a person to conduct research in a prison environment, because it may impact on the safety of the particular researcher. If a scholar wants to collect data, for example, from a school, say a primary school, a research ethics committee can only provide final approval if such a person received approval from the provincial education department. Then most provincial education departments will only provide approval if they've received provisional approval. So it's a bit of a backwards and a forwards process. For example, if a researcher wants to collect data from nurses in a hospital, there's a little bit of a different steps. Such a research will have to get permission, for example, not only from the National Health Research Ethics Council, but also from the hospital, and also, of course, from the nurses themselves. Right, so the research that involves humans, animals, and the environment require institutional REC approval. Now, the environment, I'm not going to cover much about that, but just to mention, in engineering or in architecture, that may be an item where people may want to disturb the environment. We've got currently a design student. I'm not sure if he will still register with us. He will be doing research with animals and in birds and creating some places where they can nest. So that's not only involved with the environment, with animals, but also with the environment. And I remember one of the issues that a member mentioned during a review of the proposal is that, will you wear a safety harness when you climb up the tree? That is to protect the safety of the researcher involved. Now, the big question is, what if your university's research ethics committee is not registered? How should we view research projects by a REC that is not registered with the NHREC? Can I have some comments and some ideas? What would be your take on this? Any person? Ria?
Anneke's hand is up.
Okay, Anneke?
Good afternoon. Sorry,
Hi.
I only joined late, but yeah, thank you for this workshop. No, I want to just say, I think if an ethics committee is not registered, obviously there's still a process, and we should aim to have it registered. But as I understand it, it has to be fully functional before it can be registered. But in the end, it's about ethical research. And if the ethics committee is not registered yet, but all the processes are done properly and everyone has the right training, I think it should be considered as building into research and guiding research. Whether that is how that is perceived by the outside world, I don't know. That I would love to get other people's opinions on.
Oh, Anneke, thank you. Ria, anybody else?
Nobody else at this stage.
Yeah, Anneke, thank you so much for your reply.
Oh, Willie's hand was up for a moment and then he disappeared again. Willie?
Willie, any comments?
So from my side, I think it depends on the type of research that you're doing. I think for institutions that's in the health sciences, it's critical that they are registered with the NHREC, given the sensitivity and the type of research that they are doing, and there has to be a good ethical process in place to ensure that the research being done is adequate and it aligns with I want to say national standards at the end of the day. I do think for institutions where health sciences is not a faculty, or they don't have faculties in that disciplines, and I want to say the more theoretical modules, if I can call it like that, or the non-health faculties, if you've got a research ethics committee that still follows national guidelines or standards that's also aligned internationally, for example, the Belmont Report or the Singapore Statement, for example, then that is also fine. Then because sensitive research, they can still manage that, but it's not that they will necessarily work with high intensive research cases like in the health sciences. That's just my take on it. So it's not really needed in, I want to say, in the non-health faculties.
Yeah, Billy and Annika, I cannot disagree with you. I battled with this issue myself, and I discussed it with Yolandi a few days ago. And then I looked into the 2015 publication, and I came across this. Sorry, I just want to mention NHREC has got a register, and I noticed that the VUT and the CUT do not appear on the NHREC register. Now, I know that Alan Monroe has been involved in getting VUT registered, and about a year ago, I had communication with a person at the CUT, and they said they are in the process. So it could have that they are now registered in the NHREC register, but out of line. But then the question, that we've been discussing now, do we regard a research project as null and void? Yes, and I would agree with you, Willie, that if a person does medical research and you want to speak at a conference about some invasive process and never received approval, or received approval from a REC that was not registered, which in South Africa I doubt, because it's only 2 universities that I know about. Okay, maybe just theoretical for discussion for now. So what I picked up in the 2015 publication, NHREC has got an application form to register a REC, and applicants must provide information about the terms of reference, member composition, procedure, policies, and proposals reviewed in the last 12 months. And I think, like Annika suggested, that there must have been some process, some functioning REC, even if they're not registered. So from that, I can deduce there could be room for projects approved by unregistered RECs. So if we, and sorry, I say we, I don't want to talk on behalf of DEFSA, but just for this discussion, if we then would receive a paper for peer review from an author, and the REC was not registered, yes, what I can conclude is there is room for projects like that. Really, like you mentioned, yes, we can do that and have a look at that. However, if the VUT and CUT have not registered committees with the NHREC, and they would present a paper, one of authors would present a paper, and there was some invasive medical stuff, which I doubt, but that is for argument's sake, then of course that would be a problem of considering that for publication. Then the issue is here, how should we view research projects completed at universities that were not approved by a REC? For example, say a scholar completed a project at my university, or say at the CPUT, both have got RECs, and there's no indication that it was approved by a REC, or even some of the attendees today, you completed a project and your project was not approved by a REC. What shall we do then? Any comments? Ria, are there any hands?
Yeah, Anneke's hand is up.
Anneke?
Yes, me again. Sorry, I'm so glad this is brought up. It's something that I've been wanting to ask other people at other institutions. And, you know, for me, on the one hand, I'm on the bureaucracy side because I'm part of the REC, and I need to ensure that everybody that does research in my department, in our faculty, does have at least clearance from us so that we can move forward, so that we can get our REC registered. And yes, so our institution has put in very strict rules about that. And but now I have to wonder, previously, and especially in the arts and design, for years and years and years, nobody really considered research ethics and ethical clearance for studies that involved, you know, we all know it's minimal risk. You know, people didn't even bother to think about that for many, many years. And now we are in a transition phase. And I think we need to acknowledge that, you know, in certain cases, I don't know whether it was being unaware, uninformed, just not thinking that it's an important thing because there's no real solid risk. You know, it's understandable that that this process will take a while for all the departments, all the institutions to really get on the program of research ethics and getting the clearances in place. So, yeah, in my mind, I want to be a little bit lenient, but there must almost be a day zero where from now on, nothing's going to be lenient anymore. But yeah, that's me being in with both feet on two opposite sides of the argument, which I haven't really resolved in my own head. So I'd love to get other people's opinions on that as well.
Billy or Yolandi or Inge?
I'll
Yolandi?
go.
Yeah.
I'll go. Really, it's like feeding yourself to the wolf that's standing outside of the door, answering some of your questions. So I think it depends on, so yes, ideally it should go through REC, but there's also a difference between involving humans, having human participants, and using visual data. So the level of risk associated with the research, because as Anneke is saying, we are in a transitional phase. Most institutions and researchers are learning along the way. But yes, so that's my take on it.
Any other comments?
Yeah, last year, Rudy, we had to provide, not last year, the previous DEFSA, we had to provide a certificate. I don't know, I wasn't on the other side. I don't know how it actually was enforced. And the last couple of times that I sent in any form of publication or book chapter, we had to provide some form of certificate. So they simply wouldn't even look at it if you didn't have that in place. So Willie also gave a note there that you really have to, that the institutions need to show that the project has gone through an institutional ethics committee with experienced researchers. But I do have another question. What if you're an independent researcher? Who do you go to then if you don't?
Yeah, I guess you'll have to find a REC, but that'll cost money. I know some institutional RECs would ask 10 or 15,000 for a review of a proposal. Okay, my take on this is section 1.17. It says ethical principles apply to research that involves human participants and the use of animals. Research projects that collect data from human and animals require approval by a REC. So those are the standard procedures. and that is something that we can't get away from. Now, I know that reputable publishers will not publish research results that did not receive ethical approval. However, I have seen in reputable publishers, journals published, for example, by Taylor and Francis, if you read the articles, some of them are a couple of years ago, not recent, there's no indication that the authors applied for ethical approval. So there is some merit that we are in a transition phase. However, the 2015 publication is nearly 10 years old, and universities should have functioning recs and educated their staff about this particular issue. Now, projects that rely on data in the public domain, data accessible through legislation or regulation, or observing people in public usually need not undergo formal ethics review. Those are the minimum ethical norms and standards. So if I would take photographs of a public meeting where I do not need gatekeeper permission, like a march in the street, then I do not need to have formal ethics review. Now, there are provisos about people in the public environment. Section 1.1.10 in the 2015 publication talks about this. They mentioned that there's no need for ethics review as long as you don't engage people in the street, say in a public march, and collect data from them. However, it's now a little bit of a difficulty if you work as a photojournalist and you take some photographs and then you engage people and you ask them, what is this about, what they're upset about. You come to a conference, you would show the photographs and then people ask you, what did they tell you? You say, I can't tell them because I haven't received ethics approval, So it is a bit of a dilemma for the creatives. So my suggestion, and I could be wrong in this particular one, it's good practice to provide the reasons if you did not seek ethical clearance for a project. That is, if your data does not come from people or animals, you can, for example, just state the data that I collected was in a public domain and my university does not require this, that I need ethical clearance. Or I took the photograph at this particular time, I asked the person what this was about. He said, this is what the issue is about, and so on. Or you can even expand a little bit on that. So maybe also a little bit in the gray area, and my take on this, as long as it doesn't cause harm to the people that you collected the data from. Because the aim of research is not to cause harm, but to do good. We're not photojournalists. We're not working for a newspaper. We're not working undercover for an investigative news report or anything like that. Now, data collection from people and animals, the Belmont report. They provide ethical principles and guidelines to protect human subjects during research. The basic principles are universal when collecting data for most scholarly pursuits. And we know that these reports that would guide our behavior during research is all based on what happened previously and in the Second World War. Experimentation on prisoners, experimentation by the Japanese, the Tuskegee experiments of syphilis in the Panama as well, where humans were subject to medical experimentation without knowledge, and really some bad stuff. I've read the reports, Second World War, when prisoners were subjected to freezing temperatures to see how long people can survive in very cold water before they died. And the only way that this was done is take a person, put them in cold water, measure the temperature, and see how long they could survive. So the data that they receive is valuable to see how we can live. But, to take a human being and let them die for your experimentation, that's not a very good way of behaving. Right. Then animals, there's the South African Bureau of Standards, the SANS 10386 of 2008, that regulate the use of animals. I know very little about this particular one, but I know that Alan Monroe is also a DEFSA member. He also presented items. He served on OREC committee, I think as a deputy chair or even as a chair. I can't recall the detail. But he's quite a fundi on this, and I'm sure that you would respond to any particular question about that. So my take on animals and humans and the environment is to provide full information in the report about the where, the when, and the how you collected the data. And I would say then reflect on the basic ethical principles and guidelines listed in the Belmont report, or SANS, that is if you used animals, so that readers or reviewers of a paper, when they go through your work, they can see whether you received ethical clearance or not and how you went about this. And I think just to state that you've complied with ethical standards is not sufficient. Provide the detail. If I can give an example, if one collected data from a primary school and say you received an ethical clearance, provincial education department, the principals and the parents gave permission and the teacher gave permission. However, if the child is hesitant and does not want to participate, and indicates does not want to anticipate, you've got a report that so many children didn't want to participate, and this so many children withdrew and so many parents withdrew and so on. Ethics clearance certificate. Certificate attests that REC reviewed and approved a project. Ria, I just want to check with the previous DEFSA conference proceedings, when there was a requirement for ethical clearance, did you require authors to submit these certificates as well?
Yes, we had to send it in.
Okay, wonderful. And here my recommendation is to provide the clearance number, the approval, the number, the date, and I would also suggest provide the name of the particular person that gave the approval, the chair of the REC committee. And you can also, to provide some strength, provide information about the REC's registration status with the NHREC, maybe give their registration number. A couple of years ago, I received an email from a person from a University of Technology wanting to collect data in our faculty. And we requested that the person must supply a REC-approved letter, a certificate. Eventually, the certificate arrived, but the certificate was issued by a faculty officer in an administrative position. And the letter sort of was just a memorandum to say something to the extent that the person's work is approved and may proceed with the work. And I think the word ethics was woven into the text somewhere. So we knew that was not a approval by a research ethics committee. And I think there was a case where the person did not know about REC's approval that was required, and the person that provided the authorization did not have the knowledge either and did not know what a REC would constitute. So providing those details will help as well. Now, a permission letter from a head of department does not constitute a clearance certificate. And what I would also say, when there's gatekeeper permission required, provide that information as well. Gatekeeper permission is required when a person would need permission to enter a certain area. For example, you would need gatekeeper permission to collect data inside a religious building. You would need gatekeeper permission to collect data, say, inside a sports stadium, because you go through a gate, you've got to pay an entry fee. The same with a person's house, the same with a university, even the same with a shop. If one wants to take a photograph, say in a retail store, I guess no one will stop you, but if you want to use that photograph for research purposes, one needs to get permission from the shop owner. I know of a case once where I wanted to use a photograph inside a health store. to illustrate a paper I was writing about misleading, I think, herbal supplements. And I communicated with the people. They said, yes, you're welcome to take the photograph. I took the photograph. When I went back to my email, I realized that the reasons for me wanting to use the photograph was not very clear. I then follow up with an email and said, listen, the photograph I took, this is the photograph. This is what I want to use it for. They then emailed back and says, please rather not use the photograph because such a photograph may put them in not so good light if people read the paper, because they may be seeing as selling snake oil. That is pills and powders that do not work. So I did not get that particular gatekeeper permission, and I was then not able to use that particular photograph. However, if I was now working as a photojournalist and doing some investigation, that would have been a different case. They've got different rules. But the rules that we use for ethics, our norms and standards, are slightly higher than theirs. So my recommendation is to provide the ethic clearance number in the ethics section, include the name of the ethics committee, and then include information about gatekeeper permission. And if gatekeeper permission was not required, provide the reasons for this gatekeeper permission. Then open science platforms. Can I just see a show of hands, and Ria, if you could manage this and introduce the speakers. How many of you have encountered open science platforms or used open science platforms?
Nobody's putting hands up for that. I think it's quite a new thing for us in design.
Okay, now what I've noticed in the quality journals and the reputable publishers and happening in the field of science to counter research misconduct, fabrication of data, they require, or they recommend, many have still a recommendation that scholars make their raw data, their protocols, their test instruments, and underlying data that support their results available via an open science platform. The OSF is one of those platforms. I've used it in the past. You would get a DOIR, you would get a hyperlink, you embed that in your work, in your paper. Then other scholars can inspect your raw data, they can verify the results, they can reuse the data, and they can replicate your work. Now, if you go to a website called Retraction Watch, wonderful website, they provide information about scientific papers that have been retracted. And some scientific papers are retracted because people question the results, and the scholars then say they don't have the raw data anymore. And then the results that they have is questionable because no one else can check if they have not fabricated the results. So articles are actually withdrawn from a journal or retracted if the raw data is not available. So my take on this is that, for example, if we do qualitative research and we interview a person and we transcribe the results and then we write a paper about that, so maybe we transcribe the results of 10 interviews. Now, there's a matter of subjectivity involved because we're all biased to a certain extent, and we may pick out issues that stand that is of interest to us and report on those issues. However, if we would make the transcriptions available on an open science platform, and we, for example, say that the opinion of 10 people working in this particular design field or design companies or advertising firms, this is how they see the future, or the results of COVID-19 effect on their businesses, so and so. Another scholar can go back, download our transcriptions and inspect those transcriptions and see if they agree or disagree with us. And the same with the raw data. If we work with a lot of figures and we land up with some means and standard deviations and some p-values, and we can report that, for example, in the paper, someone else would like to look at that information and they would like to do their own calculations to see if we haven't made a mistake. So really, open science platform is, from my perspective, a wonderful way to increase the value of one's research. And you can really tell your peers and the public, my work is honest. I did not fabricate my results. I did not suck them out of my thumb and so on. And here we are. And if you want to replicate the studies, this is my protocol. This is my particular test instrument. This is what I used, and they can reuse that as well. In the sciences, there is quite a strong mover to replicate work to see if people can obtain the same results. Now, UNESCO's definition, it's about making scientific knowledge available, accessible, and reusable for everyone. So what my recommendation would be in writing a good paper for DEFSA, and you've got certain test instruments, certain raw data on which you've based your results, make it available on an open science platform. It's for free and it's permanent. And it really adds additional credibility to one's work. And in that way, you can manage your data. So in 10 or 20 years, if someone questions your results and you've left, you retired, someone stole your computer and the cloud has exploded and disappeared, everything will be still on the open science platform. There is also, an open science platform particular aimed at Africa and South Africa. It's in the text document with hyperlinks how to get there. The information is there. Right, this one, Villian, I think this one will maybe answer your question, what is the difference? And this is only a perspective from myself and from Ruth Gedder. We published a paper on this at the DEFRA conference a while ago. Keeping our participants anonymous or making our subjects' names public. Now, the standard procedure is to keep research participant anonymous. And it's good reason, it's to protect participants. You know, if you're in a hospital and you get permission for the doctor to write in paper about your condition, you don't want your name and your photograph listed in the paper. You know, it's not a good process. And I do know, for example, that provincial education departments, one of their requirements is you're not allowed to identify the school. For example, you may get test results which are not flattering, and to connect the results to a school may start stereotyping a school or stereotyping participants and groups of children in a school. So it is to protect the participants, to protect stereotyping and so on. However, this practice conflict with the practice in art history where artists are identified. We know that in papers about artists and designers, the person's name is listed, what they have to say, the history, where they went, the work that they did, and so on. And I believe if we identify a person, it adds a legitimate voice to the person's opinion and answers to questions. For example, if I want the opinion about a certain design issue, I can interview either prominent designers in South Africa, those that have a voice and those that have their mark, or I can interview 10 graduate students that started working with 1 year experience. So we know that designers with experience, those that have made their mark, their voice will count. They've got some authority and we can listen to what they've said. The experience counts. So if I would keep their names anonymous and I would hide where they work and so on, I believe in a case like that, the work has got less value than making their names known. So we've got to treat people autonomous. They should make the decision. So the question that we ask, should we not allow participants to choose to remain autonomous or not? They can choose the level at which they want to remain anonymous. It adds to reliability and validity, and it provides credibility to the results. So my recommendation is consider making information available about your participants, but only if approved by University Ethics Committee, and if your participants agree to have the names and credentials listed. For example, if I provide the comments of a designer that worked for 20 years and that is the creative director in a particular firm with the international arm, such a person's opinion will have some clout. So to provide the credentials and the name adds value to those items. And I would say keep a record of this agreement. This could be either audible agreement or a transcription or email records, at least that you have got this. And in a case like this, I would also say that it will be a good move just to check with the person what you are writing about the person, what they have said. Let them vet what you have said. Let them vet what you've extracted, for example, from the interview, that the person can't come back later on and say, this is not what I meant. I could have said that, but I actually meant something else. So there's no misconstruing about what the person had said. So I would say, Willie, just to answer your question, this is maybe the difference, the only difference in ethics with medical ethics and maybe ethics in the design or creative field. Right, declaration of conflict of interest, financial or personal interest, your professional judgment. It can skew our research, design, data collection, and data analysis. Can I ask a question? This is a question I thought about, and this is really extreme case. If, for example, I write a paper and I'm critical about the visual display in a certain retailer, and I want to highlight the issues, maybe how they could be misleading consumers with the display or the text or the imagery, and my wife works as a manager or even as a till operator in a competitor, would that be seen as a conflict of interest? Any comments? Ria, if you could manage this.
Phew, they're all quiet about this one. And are you going to name that? Oh, Yolandi, she's got her hand up, and then Anneke.
Yolandi?
Definitely, if it impacts your interpretation of it.
Anneke?
Yes, so firstly, I would want to know whether the institution is actually named, whether the retail store would be named. And that's a big question because, normally one would actually have to get permission from that retail store to use the name, and they would probably not give permission. So if it's not named, yeah, then it makes it a bit more open. But I think the role of the person that is involved in the company would also matter. So if it's a person that works at the teller that has no real decision-making power there or real influence, then I wouldn't say it would be a conflict of interest. But if the person has a different role, a more senior role, where their role can actually be improved by the harm dealt to the opposition, then there is a conflict of interest for sure.
Anneke, I like your answer that a till operator may not have much influence on the issue of getting permission. Maybe make it easier that the display materials in the public domain, like on a billboard outside in a parking lot, in a what you can photograph, so you don't need gatekeeper permission. Yes, look, I would, even if my wife works as a till operator in a competitor, I think I would still declare that conflict of interest and list her position, just to make sure that if the company that I'm writing about, or not the company, the visual material I write about, cannot come back later on and accuse and says there was a conflict of interest, your wife worked for the opposition, you know, and that reviewers that would look at the work and actually see there's a potential conflict of interest, but it's not really a conflict of interest. Now, conflicts could be relationships, professional, personal, collegial, student supervisor, and work related. There could be financial conflict. So my recommendation is always right in the beginning, in the covering letter to the DEFSA proceedings editors, list these conflict of interests, what it is. For example, if my spouse would work at a hospital and I would collect data at the hospital, even if there is no influence from her side, I would just mention that in the letter to the DEFRA proceedings editor that they are particularly aware of that. If you go to Retraction Watch website, you'll notice that no declaration of conflict of interest where there was a conflict of interest is sometimes sufficient to retract a paper from a journal, depending on the level of conflict of interest. And of course, while we try to be unbiased, you know, it's very difficult to cancel that. There's always some underlying bias on our side and so on. So I would strongly recommend declare potential and actual conflict of interest in your cover letter to the DEFSA proceedings editor, and also provide such a declaration in the full paper. Now, this could be either somewhere at the end or somewhere in the beginning, where you could also maybe add your statement about ethics as well, where you have certain statements. Although not in this paper, if it's a multiple paper, it's always a good move to indicate who did what of the particular paper. For example, if you've got a student involved and the student's the first author, a person can state somewhere right at the end that so-and-so completed this work for a master's or doctoral degree, and the second author so-and-so is the student supervisor, that people can see the relationship between the two authors. Right, just a comment about artificial intelligence, text originality, imagery, and plagiarism. I just want to know how many of you played around with AI, ChatGPT?
Oh, yes. Anneke, you did, Yolandi. Yeah, hands go up.
And anybody, what do you think of this process? I know too little. That's why I ask you, what is your perspective, your opinion?
That's going to be an interesting one. I wonder how we are going to determine if anything was written by AI.
If there are no spelling or grammar mistakes.
Anneke.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Turnitin has a function that gives you a AI score. And yeah, I've been using that with my students' work. But the problem is that it doesn't really, it isn't an academic, what do you call it, misconduct yet. It isn't actually something that you can penalize directly. So I don't know what to do with that. I normally just advise my students that, you know, you can actually see if someone has been using AI, because you, if you're writing an essay like that, you have to at some stage show your own understanding, and that's normally just clear as daylight that the students don't actually understand. But yeah, I think if you want to use AI, you have to be clever. You can't be stupid and make it work for you. You have to actually be clever. It can save you time if you get to know it. I'm not there yet. I'm still learning. And at the moment, it's costing me time rather than saving me time.
Thanks, Anneke. Anybody else?
Suzanne typed, Rudy, as long as the bot is used to deepen your thinking. So I'm coding something now also for DEFSA in Atlas TI. And I just see this wonderful thing coming up that you can use AI to help you with your analysis and with your coding. And I'm too scared to click on it. I don't know if it's going to break anything or do things that I don't want it to do. So every time I just push that window to the side and carry on with my hand coding. So maybe one day I'll go and play with it. But that's also a case of how you can use AI.
Yeah, and image creations with these artificial AI software programs is incredible when you see what people can do, hey?
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
Yolandi's hand is up.
Yolandi?
Just interesting, I read a proposal from a student the other day regarding the use of AI. And we had a discussion, Carolanda and I, Ria, we had a discussion about how would you frame it? Are you co-designing with it? Or are you using it as a collaborator? So it's also how you use it, not using it is I won't say by using it, it's a sin. It's how you use it and what capacity you use it. So it just was interesting, that word of it's a collaborator, maybe someone to spring ideas off, someone to help you to think faster, and like Suzanne said, to deepen, don't think necessarily deepen your thinking, but just counter your thinking. It's almost like having a reader reading your text.
Anybody? Thanks, Yolandi. Anybody else?
Nobody else.
Okay.
I think this will be another one, I think, for a full session.
Yeah. Now look, Johannes Kron here at the CPUT had a wonderful seminar about this a while ago, and he seems to be quite a guru, and some of the contributors there really made wonderful contributions. So my only perspective from ethics is that research ethics require that we hold authors accountable for their work. So AI is not a person, so we can't hold AI accountable if we use AI to write content. And if a person would get AI to do the work for them, it is actually copied from an electronic source, and if the reference is not given, that is plagiarism, but that you can never find out because everything will be different. So, it is a bit of a difficult one, but I had a very, very interesting comment that I read somewhere, and that was a teacher required their students to write something with AI, and then they had to analyze it and critique it where AI went wrong and engage with the content in that way. Anyway, so my recommendation is original, unintentional plagiarism, watch out for that. And I would say screen your paper with Turnitin, and then send the full Turnitin report to DEFSA, that they can see at least you've done that one. And then copyright permission. You need copyright permission if you include images that not on your own. And I came across Taylor and Francis' editorial policies, and their link is there to provide helpful information. We're using images and figures in a paper to provide that as well. Include a full Turnitin report and include copyright permission in a declaration, and add this declaration in your cover letter and in the full paper. For example, if you used an image in your cover letter, state that figure 5, you receive permission, and provide the email correspondence and so on, and provide the information in the paper as well. That will just keep your enemies at bay when they look at your work. In this regard, I just want to mention that I've come across a engineering book produced by Springer, where the authors used several images from other sources without permission, and numerous images just copied from Google without references or even permission from a copyright holder. So watch me writing a letter to Springer, ask him to retract this particular book due to plagiarism of imagery. Sorry, that was just by the way. Okay. Sorry, I could not resist this. You know, when I worked on this paper, I said write a short paper, not to use AI for a research paper. And it sounds very promising what they told me. And write a short note why we must use it. And here AI tells me why we can and why we cannot use it. So it's actually very frightening to me. I should have not done this. Okay, anyway, so forget about this particular one. Okay, predatory and hijacked journals. Oh, colleagues, this is my wonderful topic that I'm researching, and I know at this current stage. I have given in the text document good links to the latest and the high quality papers about this. The predatory journal prioritizes the self-interest at the expense of scholarship. And the self-interest is most often a financial interest. You know, they want to make money from us. And the one standard or non-standard procedure for all predatory journals is no peer review or poor peer review. It makes me think, Ria, maybe you could comment what happens if a DEFSA author gets a paper in the proceedings and the review was very poor.
That is not going to happen.
Okay, let us say it did happen. It's just hypothetical. Can we regard then the DEFSA proceedings as predatory?
No, it's not predatory, but it's just poor scholarship. It's just poor management of the process.
Yeah, poor editorial work, eh? Now, look, it's very interesting. There's some software I've come across. Sorry, I don't have the reference in the paper, where you can ask the softwares like AI software to run through a journal and to make a judgment whether this particular journal is predatory or not. And they would give you sort of a rating, possible or yes or no. And they look at the policies of the journal. They look at the page submission fees. And normally what you would find a journal with page submission fees, open access journal. And even if they've got good peer review policies listed in them, but if there's poor peer review, no peer review, then it borders on possible or probable predatory journals. So I would say with DEFSA, because there's a page fee that DEFSA charges, the key should be really on quality peer review. That will just keep us on the correct side. Right, now, citing a publication that is deemed to be from a predatory publisher provides legitimacy to unvetted research results. Now, I've seen this with some smaller universities where scholars would target a poor journal. And then when you read the journal, you see the majority of the authors are South African authors, and most of the authors are from certain universities or certain departments. And the content of their papers may be good, it may be good research, but some of the research has got no relationship to the focus of the journal. And you can see this is a journal listed on the DHET's list of approved journals. But the journal is there just to make money. They would accept about anything submitted to them, and they would collect the page fees. The authors involved, they must know there is something wrong. Because if you submit an engineering paper to an education journal and they publish it, or you submit an education paper to an engineering journal and they submit and they accept this within a few days, without peer review, there is something wrong. So the moment when we start citing or referring to sources that comes from a predatory publisher, we start providing legitimacy. We pull in illegitimate scholarly work, which we should not do. So my recommendation is to use Beale's list of predatory reports. And you can identify and remove references to potential predatory journals. And I've got the hyperlinks here. And I've got a list of articles about this particular issue in the text file as well. There are also several other websites that can give you some guidance about this as well. And our colleagues, any errors, any additions, or any suggestions, please engage me or engage the group by email about this. Ria, thank you so much. I'll keep you busy for a whole hour. Colleagues, please ask questions and see how we can go forward. Over to you, Ria.
Thank you very much. This has been such a useful presentation. There's a question from Anneke. She said, if images are available on the internet on public forums, does that not mean that it is in the public domain, and as long as it is referenced, then no permission is needed?
Yes, my take it would be, but a person must just make sure that it's pictures are there honest, that someone didn't take an image from somewhere and placed it in a public forum. Make sure there's no people that hold a copyright to that particular image.
Yeah.
There are many images on Google that you can download and see, and you don't know where it comes from, and people post it on social forums. But I would say in a case like that, provide the URL and maybe in a note somewhere indicate how you attempted to provide permission from original copyright holder. Make some investigation on that. But I'll be careful to use the image in the public domain if I can't verify the copyright holder, and if it's really copyright free. That a person can use. It's different when you use an image in academic debate and at a conference in a PowerPoint presentation, because that's part of the work that we do, that's the part of the process. But the moment it gets published, that is when copyright becomes important. But by the way, I do know that the South African Journal of Art History, and I may not agree with this, they do publish many images which I know they have not received permission from the copyright holders, and they never had any problems, but I'll be very careful for that process.
And then there was another interesting question also on copywriting, on do institutions own copyright on their students' work, and then obviously the implication in the publishing space. Oh, I think Rudy disappeared. Where is he now? Rudy, there you are.
Yeah, well, look here. Please, the other colleagues, if you could give your opinion as well. I'm not a specialist on copyright on this issue. I can only reflect back on an issue that happened in Britain years ago. A person, one of my colleagues at one of the British universities, they said they had a problem with this over there, where a university wanted to claim copyright on design work developed by a student, and at the end, the ruling went in favor of the student. I know that our university, anything produced by staff and students while employed or a student, the university holds that copyright. But then again, when we do work and we publish something, and we publish in a journal, some journals, the copyright goes to the journal, so I'm not exactly how to answer this. And I think, Ria, when a scholar would publish something in the DEFSA proceedings, would the copyright go to DEFSA?
That is what is set on the website, because DEFSA then actually publish and have got the rights to further distribute that particular paper. But then, of course, all the institutions are affiliated to the different authors, but usually if you write a chapter, then you also sign the copyright over to the person who's publishing the scholarly book.
Yeah. Any comments, colleagues? What's your take on this one?
Do we have a lawyer in the room? Rudy, I think this is something that we also definitely need to talk about and to discuss. But just in terms of personal experience, also when we talk about photographs, is I sent in a book chapter, and I had to supply written permission from each and every person that potentially could be on the photographs. So in the end, we selected photographs. So it was just workshops, design thinking workshops and so on. So in the end, we just took pictures where people were in silhouette or just their hands and so on. So just be careful that you can be asked to actually provide written consent for a photograph to be used if the participant is recognizable in that. So take your pictures very carefully. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I see yes of Jody.
Jody, yes, Jody.
Yeah. If you've done a focus group workshop with students as part of your research and you take photos of their work from their experience, you'll keep the names anonymous, but you can include the images in the research. Well, we work in the visual domain, so if you do not include the images in your paper, you really lose the value and the impact of your research. So I would say yes, but I would say get permission from the students that you can use this particular image in their work. And it'll be wonderful if you cannot keep the student's name anonymous. For example, if they've done a wonderful piece of work, it'll be good if the name can be connected to their work in the paper, and it'll give them some credibility. It'll raise their profile and so on. But that depends on your ethical clearance and your ethical approval. I do know the ethics at our university, they require that the student give permission for the images to be able, for a person to publish the images in any research.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Jody. We will specifically look at this one when we look at your ethics. Just one last comment before we wrap up. Years ago, University of Pretoria published a little pamphlet about copyright and about plagiarism. And guess what they didn't do? They took a photograph of a student standing and making photocopies, and they didn't ask that student's permission to use that photograph, and they had to destroy millions of leaflets on that, retract them, collect them after they handed them out, and then do a public apology to that particular student.
Oh, because the photograph embarrassed the student.
Exactly. He said, now everybody think I'm doing plagiarism by photocopying just a piece of paper. Okay, so always look at also the light that it is used in. If he was positioned in a more favorable light, it might not have caused an issue. But in the context was very damaging to his reputation.
Wow. Okay, someone there at the university missed it, eh?
Absolutely, absolutely. But thank you very much, Rudy. I think we're going to get a lot more questions afterwards. Guys, keep the conversations going. Pop me an email if you think of something. And also, if there are particular areas that you want us to discuss in future, come up with suggestions. This has been a most valuable presentation. And thank you very much, Rudy, for taking the time for unpacking such a large topic for us in such a wonderful manner that we could so easily understand and engage with it.
Bye-bye, Ria. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, guys.
Nice to you.
And you get applause and hearts and everything all around, Rudy.
Thanks
Thank
very
you,
much.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.